Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am very excited, as always, for another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. My name is Chad, and I'm honored to have this week's guest on, who's a fellow SIOR and CCIM, although I did actually let my CCM designation go this year. Maybe we'll talk about that later in the show. But Amy's a broker, founder of her own firm called Beyond Commercial. She's an expert in the Florida market, and we're going to dive into a lot of topics about that. And just to tee it up before I bring Amy on, I was asked, someone asked me the other day what the per capita of industrial real estate was in the US. Did a quick calculation based on some numbers that I had from NAREIT and CoStar, as well as the 2021 census information. Came to about 65 square feet per person of industrial real estate. So for every person in the US, there's 65 square feet of industrial space. Quick calculation on Florida revealed it was about the same. I think it was 66 square feet per person. So it'll just be fascinating to get an idea of what's happening in Florida. There's a lot of topics. I had a few questions come in that I'm going to ask Amy, and this will be a live episode. So if you have any questions for Amy as we're going through this about Florida, about anything we're talking about, feel free to put that in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. So with that introduction out of the way, Amy, thanks so much for joining me on this call.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I know we've connected a long time digitally, and it's great to now be on your show.
Yeah, it's funny how the social media world works, where you almost feel like you know the person just by seeing all their content, and you never have that face to face, or in our case, a virtual face to face, but you just do feel a little bit of a connection by being tied in. And we're both SIORs. We've been on Twitter and LinkedIn for a long time together. So great to meet you, I guess we'll say. And I want to start by just hearing a little bit more about your background, because I believe it was 10 years. You just celebrated 10 years with Beyond Commercial. So I'd love to hear how you got into the commercial real estate business, and then the journey starting Beyond Commercial into where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you asked that question. I originally was planning to go to law school, be a lawyer. I worked in law. But one of the things I really discovered working in business and commercial real estate law, I worked alongside my husband, who has a boutique firm here in Orlando, was that the business owners who created the most amount of wealth were the ones that owned commercial real estate. And I just noticed that we had tenant representation for the law firm, but I noticed that some of the commercial real estate agents don't really bring intentionality to that and encourage business owners to think of their long-term plan and think about owning commercial real estate, think about investing about it. It kind of almost seems to be this like transaction treadmill. Ron Santomasso has talked about it. I mean, you're just constantly, trying to renew these tenants and get them onto the next lease. But then there needs to be like a moment you like step back and you like pause and say, here's where my business is at. This is where it's going. What makes sense for the business. And so I just decided at that point that, you know, I think I want to do that. I love small businesses. My husband comes from a small business owner family. I believe, fully that there can be great wealth built for businesses. And so I founded Beyond Commercial. I had my friend who was actually a business broker and who was a big influence in me too, because he does these business purchases and sales. And at the end of the day, if you cash in your business, but then you also own the commercial real estate, you created two pots of gold for yourself, basically, rather than one where you've basically run this business and you've been paying and making another family rich. So he was my broker for my firm. I started it in 2010, not so long after the last, economic, cycle. And then started to provide counsel for, my own family businesses as well as friends. And it's just actually just built basically on word of mouth. I do a really good job for one family who refers me to another family who refers me to another. A really good fit client for me is someone who is coachable and receptive and wants to learn because I love to teach and share information. And so that's basically how it all occurred. And we just keep growing year over year here at Beyond Commercial. And it, obviously, because I've earned my SIOR and CCIM, all while being at my own boutique brokerage. I feel really proud to have done that and be a great inspiration for my children now because I know my husband grew up being the son of small business owner parents. And I think his parents too, if they were to have changed anything, seeing what we've done for our family, they wish they would have owned commercial real estate as well. But we're making that right now, for the Calandrino family. So we invest in real estate ourselves now.
Very cool. And I want to talk about a few of those things about the designations. Maybe we'll leave that to near the end, and even
Yeah.
just investing in real estate as well. I want to talk about that. But first, I want to get to Florida's market, the
Yeah.
Sunshine State. And you're based in Orlando, but I
Yes.
know that you cover Florida and have quite a bit of knowledge. So could you give me just an overview on what's happening in Florida right now?
So Florida continues to have a population, migration from other states, albeit it is at a slower pace. A lot of that had to do with the pandemic. And, folks that are in real estate know that rooftops lead and then commercial follows. And, typically you'll see commercial leads and then you have the retail to support it and the offices and the industrial. And industrial tends to be like the third asset class that comes in to support, all the people that are growing in these areas of Florida. Many different cities are continuing to grow, but Orlando, what I'm seeing too is we are seeing in-state migration to Orlando from other areas, which is interesting. Some of that could be, due to, hurricanes, people not wanting to rebuild, or just that Orlando's finally, having its own identity and growing into the city that it always, should have been. And it's a lot more than Disney World, but throughout the state, including here in Orlando, we're continuing to see growth. And as the rooftops continuing to come up, you'll see the commercial follow, which includes industrial. But since industrial tends to be the one that takes the longest to catch up, you're seeing vacancy rates throughout the state or even in Orlando at single digit numbers.
Do you have any stats off the top of your head on what vacancy rates are across the state?
Across the state, no, not off the top of my head, but specifically in Orlando, we're at about a 2.9% vacancy rates, and in some areas of Orlando, for instance, we have a couple cities, one that's called Winter Park and one that's Winter Garden, that are very desirable communities outside of Orlando, and their vacancy rates for both like office and industrial have even been at like 1% or
Wow.
less. Yeah.
So is that driven by the factors that you mentioned, state migration from other states and then interstate migration? Is it mostly just population growth that's contributing to that?
I would say, yeah, population growth, and I think a lot of industrials become a bit of the new retail, where we continue to have an impact of additional industrial uses that we didn't see before. Perhaps if you're looking at smaller industrial, you're seeing more sport uses. You're seeing on larger, you might see more cold storage for, Kroger has now developed like in our market. And so they need a lot of distribution and cold storage space. You're just seeing a lot more. So not only all of these extra people, but you have all of these additional uses for industrial that you didn't see before. I think the other thing that's driving it, and this is throughout the United States, is the population, the supply chain coming back to the United States, because we've seen through COVID that having the supply chain being completely out of the United States has not been beneficial for us and can have unintended negative consequences.
And Jacksonville has a pretty popular port for container traffic and things coming in. Is that pretty much the main port for containerization in Florida, or do things come in on some of the other ports as well?
They do in Tampa as well as in South Florida. There's some container traffic, but here in Orlando, just with the way the rail is set up and such, I see most of what I'm working on here coming in through Jacksonville, and they continue to bring additional incentives to encourage people to bring their container traffic to Jacksonville. There's been a lot of business incentives. So if that's something you're interested, let me know, and I'll be happy to make some, some connections. And then they're also just continuing to deepen the port and expand it and then throwing out all those incentives to bring more people through.
It's interesting. I was reading an article the other day talking about Los Angeles port and the Los Angeles Long Beach port. I believe at one point, 40% of all freight traffic coming from overseas came through those two ports, but they're actually down, I think it was 28% from
Wow.
pre-COVID numbers. And I think that that's just a lot of companies looking to diversify and not be
Mhm.
restricted to just one port, so that if there's a labor backup or a warehouse shortage or whatever it is, they're not stuck at sea trying to get a spot to unload. Instead, now they're looking at different ports all over North America. And I think Florida, Jacksonville, and even further in like the southern coast, like Corpus Christi, some of those areas I think are going to be really good. But given that Florida has had such high migration into it, like you said, the roofs lead and then the commercial follows, I think that there's a pretty long runway for industrial. And I want to talk about, there's a couple questions that came in that were concerns that people had. But just before I get to that one, Wyatt, if you don't mind pulling up that comment that came in yesterday,
Yeah.
um, warehouse investor, any fallout from that whole Disney fiasco, or has that been a good thing for Florida? And if you can just provide a little bit of context on that, because I know that that Disney World had their own jurisdiction and they had their own police and fire service, if I'm not mistaken. And
Yes.
then your governor said, no more. We're not, for various reasons, said no more. We're cutting that off. So what has been the culture? Because you must be right in the heart of that as well, with seeing
Yeah.
that in person, how that's unfolded.
Well, I think what happened in Florida was unprecedented to give and I don't have an opinion one way or the other, because I don't know, exactly what was contemplated when they struck this original deal, but we've never seen someone given that level of control. And from what I understand is it should bring additional tax dollars and additional control and help overall. I don't think that it will have as much of an impact on commercial real estate that I can see. I think more so, from what I've heard, is the workers that were within some of these emergency operations and such are now going to be integrated into the county, and they will see additional benefits that they weren't seeing before. So I think there's going to be pluses and minuses. I certainly haven't studied the issue as in depth, because there was a waiting period where they were just basically exercising the right to potentially do this, and then the state lawmakers then all came together and looked at all the pluses and minuses. So there was almost like a waiting period. So if you remember, the news first came to light maybe like 6 months to a year ago that this may come to fruition, and they were basically giving themselves the period to then, and then ultimately they decided that it was a more positive situation for our state to do that. But I think that corporations, it could have a negative impact. Maybe I would say bringing more corporations here potentially, because maybe they might have fear that if they're given certain privileges that they may be taken away. But that's me, that's just conjecture at this point. It really would need to be something studied, but I haven't seen anything specifically yet. And this is still news, and I think it's going to continue to develop.
Yeah, as an outsider, I would echo exactly what you'd say in my own speculation, is that some companies might be a little reticent to consider Florida, but I think that that's a risk anywhere. And that was a
Yeah.
pretty extenuating circumstance that Disney even had the ability to create their own jurisdiction and all their own bylaws and everything. I don't think many companies would expect to have that level
Yeah.
of ability to self-govern. So I agree with you. From what I've seen, I think it's probably a good thing for Florida to incorporate them and treat them like every other business is treated all over North America. So I don't really see
Yeah.
that as a detriment right now, but as you said, it's early days, so we probably won't know the effects of it for years, if not decades. But that, yeah, that was fascinating that how that whole thing unfolded on that. Uh,
Yeah.
I had a question on Twitter about it. So I'm a big proponent of Florida. I think Florida and Texas are probably the two markets that I think are going to perform the best industrial
Yep.
wise over the next several years because of population growth. Exactly as you said, I think population growth leads to more industrial demand. The
Mhm.
supply isn't crazy right now. Some areas in Texas they're adding a lot of inventory, so that might be a bit concerning, but I really like Florida. That's a market that I said on Twitter. I said I'm long Florida industrial, and a great comment came in about insurance. And Ron
Yes.
Rhodey, who's a lawyer, and he practices in both Texas and Florida. He made a video about this a while ago as well, and saying that because of hurricanes and natural disasters, the cost of insurance has just skyrocketed. So that affects homeowners naturally, but then that also passes through to commercial and industrial owners. So what's going on that insurance front as someone outside of that market that only hears it anecdotally from guys like Ron? What's happening in Florida?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of background. So, as someone who has a lot of insurance on their commercial real estate properties and works with a lot of commercial real estate owners, and also having a husband that's in law and knowing a lot of different lawyers, and I have a really, really, really good insurance agent. So
That helps a
he
lot.
stays really good at his craft, and he's given me a lot of the behind the scenes. But basically, there's an area called Solo, so that's Seminole, Orange, Lake, and Osceola counties. I live here. I actually live in Seminole County, and my commercial buildings are in Orange County, and Orlando is situated in Orange County. But the percentage of litigation costs that then came through, there was just it ran rampant. These roofing contractors and different construction professionals would go out to people after they had damage to their properties and basically get what's called like an assignment of benefits. And it was basically like giving them like a blank, check. And then if also these homeowners or property owners weren't getting what they want, then in comes the lawyers. And basically the way the law was set up before, and was because it's in the past tense, because there's now been some tort reform that just got passed, and the deadline to file any cases under the old act to get these insurance and get the attorney's fees under these insurance lawsuits was last week. I think it was Friday, the 17th. Correct me if I'm wrong, so I'm just going off the top of my head. But I think so. So we had like a knee jerk reaction because I think in Florida, more than 90% of the litigation costs for all of the insurance claims are here in Florida. And so it's been bankrupting insurance companies, and then people are having to go to the state to get through the state insurance program to get insurance. And so it just has broken it. And I think that a few bad actors have like ruined, I think there should be a mechanism in which lawyers should be able to bring these claims and get their insurance to get their attorney's fees paid by the insurance companies. But in perhaps maybe just not cutting it entirely off was the answer. But so here's my long answer to this question is insurance costs were so expensive for all of these reasons. But perhaps now with this tort reform, and all these other things, and we can work to be more fiscally responsible and handle the insurance companies properly. I'm hoping that they won't continue to accelerate at the rate that they were. So, but I know at my house and on my commercial properties, my insurance rates more than doubled or even tripled
Wow.
in recent years. And also, I have one of my little listings, it's like a 2,500 square foot standalone industrial warehouse. I mean, the insurance on it's $10,000 a year. So I'm telling people what the triple nets are, and they're like, "Why are the triple nets so high on an industrial building?"
I want to
And I
talk
was like, "It's the
for insurance.
insurance. It's the
Yeah.
insurance."
That
Yeah.
That is crazy. Yeah, because you're $4 for just insurance. That's before you're putting taxes and
Yeah.
pulmonary maintenance and management on there. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was $7, $8 operating costs on that. Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah.
So you said that in some cases it's doubled or tripled. What are tenants' reactions to that? Like, and when maybe you could even share what people are saying with that small one. Are they saying, "Well, if that's what it is, I'm gonna have to pay a smaller amount for my net rent to justify this, so it's the gross cost that I'm interested in, as opposed to what the net rent and the additional rent is. I want give me a gross number, so I'm gonna have to pay less on the net rent," or how are people getting deals done in that scenario?
Well, it definitely, if you had asked me how long it would take to have a 2,500 square foot space gone, and usually it's like weeks, and instead on this particular case, it's taking months because obviously the owner, they didn't expect this when they went under contract, and it was a very tough pill for them to swallow. So it's just, we are now in some negotiations with some groups, but it's hard to find a company that wants to pay the $10,000 a year for the insurance, where they maybe can go to a small bay development where the insurance cost is spread across multiple different properties, and the per square foot is lower. But yeah, I think there has to be some flexibility on the owner side to take, less on the base rent if you get the right person that doesn't want to pay, and to be competitive. It's hard to be competitive with that type of building, um, for sure.
What have property taxes been like in Florida over the past few years?
I think that, especially I'm in Orange County in Orlando, and for my buildings, and they are certainly, the county has invested a lot more into appraisers to go out there and get accurate, property values. And so if they're doing that, and then there has been a lot of increased property taxes for everyone, as we've experienced this incredible appreciation in Florida. It's like a double-edged sword. It's great that your property's worth a whole lot more, but then I think that's something you need to look at before you buy a property is, hey, how much is the insurance now? How much is it going to be after? And make sure that you're doing an updated like pro forma, and figuring out what is the true cap rate after you have your increased insurance costs, potentially your increased property taxes. Is that property really the six cap? Let's just say that you think it is. No, probably after you close, it's gonna be higher than that. So I think it's something to consider. And it is definitely, it's it takes the right person to kind of look past those things, and still move forward, and have a big picture approach. And what I counsel people is, if you're not going to buy now, when are you going to buy? I can't give you a crystal ball. And every time you have these periods in the market where you have great periods of appreciation, and then perhaps you have, depreciation as you go through these economic cycles, it's always a new floor that's set. Let's just say it's even like a house. Like, is a house ever going to be back to $100,000 to buy a house? No, that's not going to happen. And the same thing with like industrial buildings. I remember there were buildings when I first got into this, like $20 a square foot. And in that same market, like the same building might be going for like $100 a square foot. Is that building ever going to go back to $20 a square foot? No, because you have continued inflation and these other factors that just keep setting, new baselines.
Yeah,
So
and new properties just inflation, as you're mentioning, just cost more. So the older properties will always sell at some function of what it costs to build for an older
right,
property. So wait, if it costs $150 to build right now, an old building is not going to sell for 20 again, unless the
right.
whole economy collapses on us. I just wanted to touch on that one point as well, talking about insurance and property taxes,
Yeah.
because and I'm sure in Florida it's the same way. Most it's triple net leases for the industrial anyways. So
Yes.
tenant pays the base rent and they pay their proportionate costs of operating expenses. Uh, what a lot of people think is that that's great. So if there is an increase in insurance and there is an increase in taxes, which is the environment we seem to be living in all over the world right now, is increasing costs. Yes, the lease should stipulate that you can pass those through to a tenant, but at some point there's going to be a breaking point where they just can't
Yes.
afford to do it. And
Yeah.
maybe that's on renewal. Maybe it just actually bankrupts them because the costs have gone up too much, and they're getting flowed through to there. Or in the case of the building that you have that's vacant, if tenants are reluctant to do it, then the owner is either going to have to sit on it longer, or they're going to have to take less base rent
Yes.
themselves, and that means that they have less money to service their debt. That means they have less revenue to invest back in the property, and it really does become a terrible cycle where
Yes.
the property owners don't have enough to get what they need out of the property. The tenants are being forced to pay more than they want. So it does become problematic when we're dealing with these property tax and insurance issues. So it's good to hear that that tort reform. And if you could share something with me after, I'll put that in the comments if you happen to have an article about that, because I think that that'll be really fascinating for people that are concerned that Florida's insurance has risen so much. So if you do
Yeah.
have anything after, Amy, and I'll just post that in the comments on that. But I
Yeah.
want to move on. Oh, sorry.
I'd be happy to share some resources on that. And I do think it's a good thing. Would I have wished? I think that, just in business in general, we tend to have these knee-jerk reactions where we go too far one way or the other. And that seems to be kind of what's happening with this tort reform, where it's like, let's just completely stop it rather than trying to find some type of middle ground. So you just end up with this back and forth. But I do think that it will have a positive impact. And I think that it will, if there's more competition and there's more insurance carriers who will insure here in Florida because they have more confidence being here in Florida. And then instead of like a few insurers, I think that it should help with increased competition to bring the prices down for insurance. That's my own conjecture on that.
Yeah, and I don't think the population growth is gonna slow down in Florida. It's the Sunshine State for a reason. I think a lot of people just want to be there. So I think that there will be a solution to that issue. It's just how long it takes and what wrinkles occur along the way. But I'm sure that you'll figure it out. I want to move over to talk about your investment strategy. So you're in brokerage, which a lot of us start in brokerage and get the itch to do investing. It was the same with myself. As soon as I got into commercial, I knew that I had to. I'd owned some residential before, but I knew that I had to start getting into commercial. So, what was your entry into deciding that brokerage is great? It's a great way to earn a living, but to really generate wealth, you want to look at investing. What was your entrance into that?
Yeah, so at this time, I am primarily, I do office and industrial. Right now, for me, I think the best way to enter, if at all possible, if you're a business owner, is to do owner occupied, because the tightening of the banks. I mean, you could get a 15 year loan with a 15-year amortization term, and amortization like a 15-15 with 15% down.
Mm.
And I did not buy my first building until 2019, but I had like a 4% interest rate on it, and I ended up selling that building in 2022 and rolling it into two other buildings, one for my husband and one for me, rather than us being in the same. And I'm working on acquiring some other properties next to it. But I think owner occupied is a great way to get into it, because then when you're not losing all that money to someone else and you are building that equity, then you can work to deploy that equity to then start to build build up your investment portfolio into other things. If you want to just get straight into investing, and owner occupied is not not in the cards for you, for whatever reason, then looking at what meets your lifestyle. Are you going to manage it yourself, or do you have someone who's going to manage it? What makes sense for you, and working with someone who can figure out what type of property and what type of investment best fits you, because not everybody likes the same kind of ice cream, and that's okay. So figuring out whether you would rather have single tenant, multi-tenant, small bay, logistics, or whether you want a newer property, older property, how much equity do you have to put into the project? What's your time horizon? Those are all things to look at.
Yeah, I love the point that you made about owner users and natural. And I agree. If it's a company that has some extra money and retained earnings, and they're not sure where to deploy it, owning your own real estate can be very profitable. I have a quick story about that actually, because
Yeah.
this was very recent. A guy that I talked to probably about a month ago, he started a company in the early 80s. And when at the time he bought, think it was like 20 acres of land
Mhm.
outside of the city. So the city hadn't developed nearly to that point yet. He was way on the fringe, but he bought something like 20 acres and he put on about an 80,000 square foot
Mm.
shop for his business. And he's run his business the entire time through. And the total cost of buying that land was 200 grand, give or take. And then
Wow.
whatever it would have cost to build an 80,000 square foot building in the 80s, I don't know, $10 a foot. So say that he was in that property for $1 million. He just had an appraisal on it for 17 million. So his business was profitable the entire time. Say he was
Wow.
into it for 1 million, appraised at 17 million. So that's an outlier. I don't think everyone's going to hit a home run like that, but it does show the power of owning your real estate as
Yes.
opposed to having to deal with lease negotiations and what happens if the landlord needs a space for another tenant. You really don't have that
Yeah.
control over your space as you do if you own it.
I think it provides a less friction for a business owner to grow by having that asset and no longer being someone else's tenant and making some other family rich. I think it's wonderful to see, and I've helped many manufacturing or otherwise industrial users acquire commercial real estate, and it's been wonderful to see. Like one in particular, I worked with in 2020, early 2020, and we were touring right as the pandemic was starting to kick in here. But I took him from 15,000 square feet that he was leasing and helped him to buy a 55,000 square foot facility.
Wow.
And I was able to lease out the other bays to, he had an extra 15,000 square feet that he wasn't going to use of the building. But his company has continued to grow. Like he's tripled his workforce size because he's had this space that he hasn't had to pay to someone else. It's just his mortgage. And he keeps being able to increase the amount of rent that he's paying to his holding company. And now we're actually helping him to acquire another property. And this is just like 3 years later by not losing all of that. Because also another pattern I saw when I worked in law is you have a lot more negotiating leverage with a bank because they do not want to own a building. So it just, God forbid, I think people freak out trying to buy commercial real estate because they're worried about the worst possible thing that can happen. Well, I can tell you from seeing it that the banks don't want to own property. And if you have a good, attorney on your side and helps to negotiate, you should be able to work things out, if something, God forbid, doesn't work out. The other thing is if you don't own your own property, yeah, you're at the whim of the landlord, and they can all of a sudden come to you, decide to raise the rents for 40%, and then what are you going to do? And you're having to all of a sudden disrupt your business and lose all those profits rather than being in control of your destiny. I think it gives you a lot of confidence knowing that you own your own building, and having been through it for our family businesses before, having to constantly try to find new space when we came up to the end of the renewals and figure all that out. We've been able to really accelerate our growth through having our own property. And I've seen it for the industrial users that I've had.
Well, and congrats on that as well on having the one building, selling it and turning it into two. Congrats on that
Yes.
growth. Gordon joined in. Great podcast too, by the way, Gordon. Amy, you'd be an awesome guest on Gordon's channel. I'll connect the
Oh,
two of you
great.
after. He says, nice inflation hedge and a solid method to retain capital by owning over leasing. Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're all on the same page with that. There's a lot of benefits for that. Another comment came in. Operating a business and doing owner occupied via SBA loans as a veteran is a great way to get into building, and you can lease out the other 50% of the building. Commercial industrial hacking. Yeah, like the life hacking, but commercial and industrial.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll let you chime in here too. It's just why it's pulling up, hitting me with a whole bunch of questions and comments here all at once. Neil, thanks for joining in. What are some of the unexpected issues an industrial owner can encounter? Great question, because it's
Yeah.
we are saying, and I'm a big advocate of people owning real estate, but there are issues that can come up. So what are some of the common ones that you've seen that people should be prepared for, Amy?
I think that when someone goes from leasing to buying and no longer having a management company and they don't get someone to help them manage and they take it all on themselves, that all of a sudden they start to have all these surprises. It's almost like moving into a house and then you're like, "Oh, I didn't know this. I didn't know this." And there's only so much you can uncover in an inspection. And so I think that when you're buying, tend to see all the really great things, but then when you close, some of the things you didn't think about come out. So whether it's what I've seen is you all of a sudden realize that I'm trying to think of like what are the unexpected you I think just the maintenance and just understanding
Agreed.
all the maintenance that needs to happen and the preventative care and making sure that you get your ACs with an AC vendor and then all of a sudden just managing all these things yourself. But then once you get all of your mechanical onto a maintenance contract and get that, it's just the administration I see is the major issue. And then I think a major issue that you could have too is if you don't put together reserves for replacements. So I do coach those that I work with to make sure that you have enough money set aside for if you have to do some roof repairs or other issues before. If you've been a tenant, you're just used to the owner coming in and handling those things and sending you a bill for it. But then actually having to go interview all those contractors and manage it yourself can be a little overwhelming at first, but that you get used to it, and then after, especially if you've owned your first property, it's not as overwhelming. But I think an industrial owner or any asset owner can. It's just the administration and learning to put aside reserves for replacements and getting used to having to deal with all these issues instead of someone else taking care of it for you.
Excellent point, and I'd completely agree with you on that. Is that probably be the biggest surprise that I've seen people have. And when I started buying property myself, the same thing is before, if it was managed, especially if there was a sophisticated property manager, a
Mhm.
sophisticated owner, they would have maintenance schedules and duties being done regularly. And if you're just a tenant, it's just white noise. You might notice it
Right.
happening, but you're not paying attention to it. When you start getting into it, you probably don't have those relationships with an HVAC company or a plumber or an electrician that can come and do day-to-day maintenance or fix things when they break down. So just
Yep.
getting yourself up to speed so that you are diligently tracking that. And one thing that I like to say to people is that it's not property management, it's asset management. Like, you really got to look at that as that is an asset, and you've got to manage it beyond just the tenancies or the day-to-day things. It's really an asset management, and
Yeah.
how are you going to take care of all those systems, mechanical, plumbing, all those things, just to make sure that they're maintained, as opposed to waiting until they break down, because that's when you get hit with a really large expense.
And I would say a pro tip would be everything that you're doing. I know people can be busy, especially if they have businesses and they're investing in commercial real estate. I would say make sure that you're really diligent of keeping track of all of those records, because the more pristine that you can show that you've taken care of your asset, and I love that you're using that word instead of property management, asset management, because it is an asset. I think the more organized you can be and having perhaps like a Dropbox folder or a box folder. I personally, for anything that comes in for vendors for any of my organizations or holding companies, have like a separate like email. And then you can organize it there or otherwise. But I think keeping track of all that, I was able to sell my office building in less than 100 days because I had everything in one folder. I'm like, here's all the vendors, here's where we show we taking care of the buildings, these are all the improvements we put into it. And we were able to show, and we were able to have multiple people bidding on it because we showed how well we took care of it. And so I think sometimes people tend to, like, they want to save money, but I think the investment into your asset and taking good care of it and being a good steward of the asset, it can really bring you a lot of value later on, and showing that you took great care and keeping track of that, um, it can pay off in the end.
Such a good point. And we could parallel that or contrast the two. So imagine you were selling a property where you meticulously organized and detailed everything that you've done to that. And say there's another property in the market that has none of that. There's no maintenance records, there's nothing on file. It was just a loosely managed investment. And
Right.
if you're a buyer and you're looking at those two properties side by side, it's clear that you're going to go to the one that's more organized, if not even being willing to pay a premium just because you know that there was more work and diligence put to that property. So I
Hmm.
agree with you completely. There's so much benefit to just tracking all of that stuff. And I love the point you made about even just having a vendor list, because that's so important as well. Where if someone is looking to buy that property, instead of having to set up a whole bunch of new accounts, if they can just transfer that over, the
Hmm.
companies already know the property. Presumably, you've done due diligence on them to make sure they're giving you a fair price and taking care of it. There's a lot of value that goes into
Yeah.
that. That is a great pro tip. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I want to, and again, if you have any questions for Amy, Florida, owning property, anything we've talked about, feel free to throw that in the chat. Appreciate all the comments and questions that have come in already. I want to move on to two topics related to brokerage mostly, but I think that there can still be some overlap for people that are tuned in that are on the investment side. And the first one I want to talk about is social media, where you have a
Yes.
big presence on social media, and you've utilized it very well. So what's been your experience, and where do you focus your time? Because I know that this is a question that gets asked of everybody that has a big social
Hmm.
media presence. Where do you find the time to do this? Where do you focus? Where do you get the best results from with the time that you do spend on social media?
Wow. Well, you have perfect timing for this question, because just last night I posted one of my listings on LinkedIn, and to my surprise, well, I shouldn't be surprised because this does happen. I have an email from someone that's a highly qualified buyer for the listing this morning, and just getting it out there. So here, for any people that are in brokerage, I would say anytime that you have a showing or an interaction or otherwise connect with anyone, just immediately add them to your LinkedIn. Just keep adding them to your LinkedIn, and basically think of it, it's almost like having a MailChimp or like an email distribution, and it's going to go out to all these different people to share this information. I do a presentation pretty frequently on building brand, because I feel like it's something I've done quite well. I first started doing YouTube in 2017, and primarily that hasn't grown as much as I use that to like syndicate out on the different channels. But I've had good success on getting leads for any kind of clients via Instagram. And that just comes from friends, family, people I worked with before. They'll send me a message and say they know someone, or we're interested in this thing that you're doing. So I've had good traction from Instagram. I don't think that I've really gotten any deals from Twitter so much as just having really good discussions, and I've been able to learn a lot from Twitter. I love participating in the CRE chat that happens once a month on like Thursday nights. That's been great. And me and you were able to connect more there. And I've had great value come from LinkedIn as well. Just like I said, that story last night of sharing the listing, but I've had deals happen by sharing it. And it also brings awareness to what I do, but it's constantly evolving. I think I invest, I would say, a few hours a week into social media. It may seem like I do more, but I'm really organized. I utilize Hootsuite to distribute a lot of the information. And during the day, I try to just stay off of social media and just like work. So I might do a little bit of social media in the morning, but then the rest of it tends to be at night, because I just checking in on it is almost like checking your emails like every like 30 minutes. It can keep you from being productive and getting the deals that you're getting from social media. But it takes a while. It's just like learning like a sport or like an athlete. And the more you do it, the easier that it is, and the more comfortable you get doing it. And then you continue to build an audience of people.
Yeah, I think the craziest part about social media is that a lot of people see it as a mechanism to get results quick, when my experience has been the exact opposite. It's a mechanism to have some success over a very long period of time.
Yes.
I just had a notification on Twitter the other day that it was my 14 years that I've been on Twitter.
Wow.
And the first number of years, I was more of just a passenger on the ride, where I wasn't contributing a whole lot. It wasn't until recently that I started trying to engage more. But I agree with the one point that you made, is it has to be an active process. And that's, if you meet somebody, add them on LinkedIn, like you said. And it
Yeah.
becomes more, instead of being passive with social media, which I think far too many people are, for better or for worse. I'm guilty of it myself, as well. So it's not chastising anyone. I think that it's just the temptation is to just expect that if we had the odd thing out there, or we just do the bare minimum, that things are going to come from it. And my experience is the opposite. You have to engage with people. You have to have conversations. One guy that I was talking to said this very well. He said treat it the same way as being in a networking function. You wouldn't go to
Mhm.
a networking function and sit at a table in the corner all by yourself and not talk to anybody and expect that to be a favorable outcome. Instead, you're going to try to talk to people, and ideally, you want to ask questions and see how people are responding, how receptive they are, and then maybe that leads to a coffee down the road. But you have to treat social media the same way, whereas it's an active process. And if you're
Mhm.
patient with it, then I think that the results can come. And the one point you made as well, just for mental health, if nothing else, don't check it all the time.
Yes.
It becomes internet points, right? Where you put on a post and you expect to get likes or comments or whatever it is, and there's just internet points. Doesn't mean anything. You need to actually be able to convert that either into more meaningful relationship or business or whatever it is. But relying on it too heavy is also a bit of a drain on the mental health. So thanks for sharing those tips. And the next question that I had for you was on designations. So
Yes.
you have both the SIOR and the CCIM. When did you get those? First part of the question, and the second part is, what made you decide to actually pursue those in the first place? Maybe I reversed those questions in my head.
Well, I was introduced to CCIM in 2015. And some people don't know, but before Beyond Commercial was Beyond Commercial, we were actually Silverleaf Realty.
Hmm.
And it was silver because I brought value, in leaf because I help people grow. And it's still basically the same mantra, and I still have the same vision for my organization. But at the time, I thought that I could be a solution for busy business owners that needed commercial real estate space, but I could be more concierge and do all of these different things. When I was introduced to CCIM, I realized that being and if you do residential and commercial and you're in a smaller market, that's great. But for me, if you're going to be a bum, be the best bum. And I learned if I'm going to do something, I want to be the best of it. So when I was a paralegal, I actually was a certified paralegal and a Florida registered paralegal and did all the things. I basically could do everything except for like argue in court. Like I got to the highest level that I could. So, but when I learned about the CCIM, I felt like I was given a lot of great information, being able to collaborate with a lot of people. My issue was not being with a larger firm and having my own brokerage and being a woman that not everybody knew. I didn't have the presence back then that I have. I think if you're in the Orlando market and you say Amy Calandrino, people are going to know who I am. But that wasn't the case back in 2015, 2016. And in 2016, I rebranded to Beyond Commercial. But still, then I had the comments like, "Are you taking a break from showing houses to come show this building?" I had a lot of people not call me back. I think I'm a very smart, individual, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I embrace my nerdiness now, and that I am incredibly gifted in that regard. But not everybody like else saw that and was very dismissive of me. And so for me as a woman, I felt like I had to get it just to bring some legitimacy to me, and it really did. It made it a lot easier to call on other listings, and once they saw those initials by my name, it kind of you know solidified what I already knew about myself, that I was a very highly confident, expert, individual, and I knew that I was taking great care of my clients and doing the best and doing it to the highest level of standards. But I needed some letters behind my name to prove it to the universe. And so that was my driving need. I know that's not everybody's, but I've also learned on social media and otherwise that if you're yourself and you're authentic, that's the best way to be, and to not try to be anyone else. And my journey is uniquely, my own.
Yeah, it's funny. I shared the same thing when I got my CCIM. I was young into the business, and I
Yeah.
looked really young and as an experience. And I just thought having that designation would just signal to the market that you at least have like an aptitude to want to pursue it more and become an expert. And everything that you said were similar reasons on why I did it. And then SIOR, I got mine in 2017. When did you get your
Mhm.
SIOR?
I am newly an
Oh, well,
SIOR, so I
congratulations.
just earned it in 2022. So
Congratulations.
yeah, so I got my CCIM designation in 2018. And then as soon as I got that done, I was like, okay, it's time for babies. It's like baby number one in 2019, baby number two, 2021. And then I'm like, okay, it's time for another designation. So I bookended it with my children with designations.
Because you didn't have enough on your plate
I
already.
didn't have enough on my plate. I needed more to do, but I really enjoyed the SIOR community. It's a really great community. I think CCIM has great connections. I think the education is really good, but I think if you do a lot of industrial in office, I think SIOR has been quite beneficial to me.
I agree completely. See, I think of CSAM as all about the education. SIOR is all about the network, and there's overlap too, of course. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a big fan of. I recommend CSAM, even though I let my designation go this year. But I'm a huge fan of SIOR. Question from Harry. Thanks for joining, Harry. Good to see you. As a younger agent, should I focus on CCM or SIOR first? Most people advise me CCM, and recently there are some people saying skip CCM and go straight for SIOR if you're focusing on industrial. Well,
Hmm.
we kind of touched on that a bit already, Amy. But what would be your comments to Harry on that?
Well, I think that you need to learn before you earn. And I know that's like trite to say, but you could never learn too much. I think that if you're planning on doing both, I think it just depends on the people that you have around you within your organization. If you feel like you already have a lot of the tools that you're going to learn with CCIMC, I earned an English degree. So I did not have like a finance degree, and so having all those spreadsheets and all the different tools and the lease versus buy analysis and everything that they cover in 101, 102, 103, 104. Every time I took one of those class, I kept making more money. So I don't think that I would have done it another way. So for me, I think I still would do CCIM first, because every one of those courses came with a lot of tools that every time I took one of the classes, then it became easier to do deals. But if you already have a really strong mastery and you're in a firm where you already have a lot of those spreadsheets and such, then maybe go to SIOR first, because they have a lot of additional classes before you get into you do the boot camp and all those kinds of things, which I love the boot camp. It was great. I learned a lot. I thought I already knew a lot, but I always pick up something.
Yeah, I'm the
So
same way on that.
so I just think, I guess it depends. Like if you're someone who's like a boutique in a boutique organization like me, maybe you don't have as much, support and as much access to all the educations, and maybe you already and you need more of the spreadsheets and the backup to make the money. So then that way you can actually get the SIOR, because it has a GCI requirement versus CCIM. You could do 20 deals regardless of size, and you don't have to actually have a GCI requirement. So
Yeah,
it's
and
all
there
things to consider.
and that gross commissioning income, I think that's the acronym, that you have to do 3 years out of 4 or 3 years out of 5. And it's a pretty high threshold. So just from a pure timeline, you'll have to be in the business at least 3 years, and that's assuming that
Yeah.
you're producing at a high level right from the beginning. Whereas I'd say most people that are getting their SIRs have been in the business for a while. But like you said, the education for CCIM is second to none. You get a
Yeah.
designation that says that you're committed to excellence and you want to be one of the best in the market. So I would recommend pursuing the CCIM early. And once you start getting towards that level where you will be hitting those GCI requirements, I'm a big advocate of SIR. I think it's the best organization I belong to. So yeah,
Yeah.
I both. I mean, both. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing both. And Amy's done both. I've done both.
Yeah.
Pros to both of them. I saw there's some more comments that came in. Wide, if we, because
Oh,
we got about
excellent.
5 minutes
I'm going
left
to take a
here.
quick sip.
Perfect. Thanks for the advice. Thanks for tuning in, Harry. Ron's in. Hey, Ron's in. Just started doing some deals, Harry. You got the mentors. Yes, agreed. It's good advice. Start doing the deals. Another comment. Property admins can risk getting day-to-day maintenance modes and miss opportunities to proactively invest in their properties' future opportunities with infrastructure and zoning upgrades. Yeah, very good point. And I think that does come on the property management side. I think a lot of property managers do just look at it specifically as property management, where that asset management mindset, you are looking at how property management is an umbrella under asset management, but
Yeah.
you also are looking at that bigger picture and how you can add value to a property. So a great comment on that. Ron, how much value would you peg organized seller is worth? I'll let you answer that one, Amy. So I think he'd probably be going back to that comment of two properties side by side. One where yours is very organized, you have all the
Hmm.
information, and the other one where it's loosely organized by comparison. What do you think would be a premium for the one being super organized?
Well, I think not even to quantify it in dollars, but I think it just makes the transaction so much smoothly, and I think it helps to alleviate any kind of fear. So you don't want, especially someone who's maybe not a sophisticated purchaser. Maybe it's their first building that they're buying. For instance, the building I just sold for myself was purchased by the Florida Bar Foundation that like oversees the Florida Bar. They haven't owned a building before, and they were concerned, but being able to see everything you know, help them a lot. How much that would be quantified? I mean, I would have to say that the deal's going to get done more quickly,
Mhm.
and probably tens of thousands of dollars. I wouldn't think it'd be like hundreds of thousands, but I think certainly being able, anytime you can justify the value and show the investments that are made and show the care and it would be like buying a car and being able to show all the maintenance records versus, I have this 1990 Porsche and good luck, right? Like, it's the same thing with any kind of commercial property. So I would have to say probably tens of thousands of dollars. And I think it's just going to speed up the transaction and make it more smooth.
It could even be the difference between not selling it and selling it.
Yes.
If there's like using the Porsche example, let's say you don't even know when the oil was changed last. A
Hmm.
buyer might say, I just don't even know if I want to take on this hassle right now. Whereas
Right.
if all the records were there, whether it was a car or a property, all the records are there and they could look through it. That might be enough to say, yeah, you know what, let's go forward with this and at least go through due diligence on it. So I,
Right.
I, I agree with you. It'd be hard to quantify an actual premium, but I think it could be the difference between selling it and not selling it. So
That's true. I think you'll end up with more prospects. And so, I think of selling. I become really good at selling and leasing properties. I don't mind tooting my own horn on that. And it's all about but the more prospects you have, the more offers you're going to have, and the more offers you have, the more, value you're going to receive. And so at the end of the day, if you have more people that are going to be interested in your asset, because they can see the value in it because you've been organized and you've kept you're able to show it, then you're going to be able to get more people interested versus those like I don't know what I'm going to get into. You'll definitely, it makes the difference of someone considering to buy or not buy, just by you know what about it, being able to know about the property. And then also I think when someone's acquiring it, they're going to know it's going to bring them more value in the future, already knowing what happened and where they're jumping off from, and what's their baseline to then move forward and continuing to keep the property up to value.
Well said. Did we have any other comments, Wyatt? Because we're actually right at the top of the hour, so it's probably a good place to wrap
Yeah.
up with that. Amy, I'll put usually I put website and LinkedIn in the description. Any
Yeah.
other places that are great to reach out to you? I know you've got an Instagram account, Twitter as well. I'll try to put as many as I can. Anything beyond those ones? Website, LinkedIn, Twitter.
Okay, so I'm on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook is I think Orlando Commercial Real Estate Expert. I think I have a podcast, so you can always go to performancemindset.show. My personal website is amycalandrino.com. You can get a kind of flavor for me personally. And then the company I own is called Beyond Commercial, and you can go to beyondcommercial.com and you can kind of see that we are more of a holistic firm and handle the whole life cycle for a business or for a family that does investing.
I'll put as many of those as I can remember to
Yeah.
put in there. And I'm sure, because I was on your Beyond Commercial, I'm pretty sure there's links to
Yeah.
the other ones on there as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
I'll put
Yeah.
those in there, and really do want to thank you for sharing so much insight. We covered a lot of information from Disney World and industrial in Florida to networking and designations and social media. So I want to thank you for taking the time to share all those different things and give your insight on that. And I really hope people reach out to you and connect with you. If anyone in Florida, it'd be crazy not to reach out to Amy and
Yes.
have her on your team. So Amy, once again, thank you for your time.
All right. Thanks, Chad. We'll stay in touch.
Absolutely. And if you like this episode, would love it if you gave a thumbs up or give it a thumbs down if you didn't like it. And leave a comment is always helpful as well. Appreciate you tuning in, everyone. Have a great day. And see you next time.